Financial institutions will come to order. Without objection, the chairman is authorized to declare a recess of the committee at any time. This hearing is titled Evaluating the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. Without objection, all members will have 5 legislative days within which to submit extraneous materials for inclusion in the record. I now recognize myself for 4 minutes for an opening statement. This is the third hearing with the Director of FinCEN as required by Section 5336 C11 of the Corporate Transparency Act. Today provides a public forum to examine FinCEN's operations, the troubled status of the Beneficial Ownership Information Reporting Regime, Anti-Money Laundering Act of 2020, and the history and impact of the Bank Secrecy Act. The goal of this hearing is to assess these tools for targeted reforms that enhance security without trampling on privacy and innovation. This testimony should help Congress assess how these frameworks target real threats like terrorist and cartel financing networks, scam centers, and other illicit finance. The big question is how to do it all while avoiding surveillance of law-abiding Americans and small businesses. The Bank Secrecy Act was enacted in 1970 with a narrow, good intention to create transparency against organized crime's infiltration of our financial system. Over decades, the BSA has morphed into a bloated surveillance machine, demanding endless reports from banks, businesses, and individuals without delivering proportional results. Today, this framework is dangerously outdated, and the BSA's one-size-fits-all mandates are tying up lots of resources. Are they being used effectively? In recent years, the Bank Secrecy Act, Corporate Transparency Act, Anti-Money Laundering Act of 2020 have proven sometimes ineffective, but always cumbersome. For example, FinCEN's own data shows that from 2014 to 2023, law enforcement agencies only accessed about 5.4% of the millions of currency transaction reports filed under the Bank Secrecy Act, highlighting how this flood of paperwork buries real leads in bureaucracy instead of focusing on bad actors. And on the CTA front, we've seen FinCEN issue overbroad rules that treat every mom and pop shop around the country as potential money launderers, forcing disclosure of personally identifiable information into a federal database that isn't well safeguarded against hacks or misuse. That's not security, that's an invitation for abuse. And we've witnessed it in other cases like Operation Choke Point. While millions of American businesses are relieved by March's delayed enforcement of Corporate Transparency Act's beneficial ownership mandates, they await clear guidance from FinCEN about what the future looks like. We appreciate the interim rule, and we're happy to work to finalize it. We are, in fact, working on a law to cement it, but the market really wants clarity and certainty on where things are headed. Meanwhile, true threats like Chinese fentanyl cartels are laundering billions through U.S. real estate, or Russian oligarchs who are sometimes evading sanctions. They slip through because resources are tied up with collection rather than analysis. So we need to index outdated CTR thresholds for inflation. We should codify the full repeal of CTA's beneficial ownership mandate on U.S. businesses and focus it on external threats. This hearing is our chance to demand accountability. With that, I yield the balance of my time. And I now recognize the ranking member of the subcommittee, Ms. Beatty, for 4 minutes for her opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and certainly thank you for being here, Director Gacki. You're going to have a lot coming at you today as our only witness sitting up there, and I think you should take that as, because you have so much experience, you have worked through President Trump's administration, President Biden's administration, and so we're hoping that today's hearing will shed light on the national security consequences if we cripple your office and our financial crime programs. Because one thing I can tell you is that we all are against corruption. No one wants to be engaged sitting on this committee by the very nature of the title that my Republican colleagues have named it. So I am very anxious to hear from you today. So we know that the Financial Crime Enforcement Network is small, but it is of vital importance in a bureau at the Treasury Department that is tasked with protecting our financial system from traffickers, from money launderers, from terrorist facilitators, and other bad actors. To put this work in perspective, let's look, for example, at something that we've all been engaged with on both sides of the aisle, and that's illicit fentanyl. That trade that has devastated our communities over the last decade, and I can say, as well as I'm sure our chairman will, because we're both from Ohio, and what has happened in our districts. FinCEN follows the money to the origins of these drug supply chains to disrupt finance streams wherever it can, hopefully preventing synthetic opioids like fentanyl from entering our country. When my constituents ask me what we're doing in Congress to stop fentanyl deaths and protect our communities, I tell them about the important work that we do on this committee to make it tougher, to make it less profitable for drug traffickers, and to conduct their crimes. And FinCEN is central to that effort, and thank you. Given that, Director Gacki, I am proud of the work that we've done in recent years to bolster our national security and crack down on financial crime. However, today's hearing, our first FinCEN oversight hearing since the administration's change, comes in the wake of a series of dangerous rollbacks in our illicit finance regulatory framework. And just to name a few, the Trump administration has endeavored to unlawfully eliminate the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, the agency responsible for protecting Americans from fraud and abuse. The president has changed the way the United States enforces the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, which prohibits Americans from bribing foreign officials. And perhaps the most alarming of all, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent gutted the Bipartisan Corporate Transparency Act, which President Trump signed into law during his first term, exempting over 99% of the companies that Congress intended the law to cover. This stunning reversal eliminates a critical new tool for law enforcement to unmask anonymous shell companies, effectively making the United States the preferred haven for money laundering, traffickers, and fraudsters. Instead of working with Congress to make key reforms to the law that would ease small business compliance concerns, the administration chose to directly ignore the law as it was passed and intended to be implemented by a strong bipartisan Congress. Further, these recent actions threatens our national security, weakens our efforts to fight money laundering and the finance of terrorism, and gives us fewer tools to protect hardworking Americans. So good luck today, and we're excited to hear from you. I yield back.
Thank you. I now recognize the chairman of the full committee, Mr. Hill, for 1 minute for an opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank FinCEN Director Gacki for joining us today. It's good to see you. Glad to have you back before the committee. FinCEN plays a crucial role in safeguarding our nation's financial system from illicit activity. Today's hearing will give committee members the opportunity to hear from and question the FinCEN Director on the agency's operations, including the current status, as noted by the ranking member, of the beneficial ownership reporting rule and other efforts to fight financial crime. I was pleased to see Treasury's interim rule issued in March exempting U.S. companies from beneficial ownership reporting requirements. It marks an important step towards easing regulatory burdens on some 32 million hardworking American small business people nationwide, and I look forward to learning more about the forthcoming rule. We will also assess the Bank Secrecy Act's performance over the past 5 decades and explore ways to modernize it and ensure it remains effective in protecting our national security. I look forward to the hearing, and I yield back.
Thank you, Chairman. I now recognize the ranking member of the full committee, Ms. Waters, for 1 minute for an opening statement.
Thank you, Chairman Davidson and Ranking Member Beatty. While I'm pleased to welcome back Director Gacki, I'm disappointed we're not more closely reviewing the Trump administration's and congressional Republicans' actions that weaken America's capacity to stop money laundering and fraud. Today, American consumers are less protected from fraud and corruption thanks to Trump's closure of agencies like the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. Today, America is less secure thanks to Trump's firing of government examiners, investigators, prosecutors, and inspectors general. And drug and human traffickers will thrive due to the GOP's gutting of crime-fighting tools like the Corporate Transparency Act and the Investment Advisors Rule. If we really want to stop fraud, we shouldn't eliminate the very government workers who are charged with doing so. I yield back.
Thank the ranking member. Today, we welcome the testimony of Ms. Andrea Gacki, Director of the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. Thank you for taking your time to be here. You will be recognized for 5 minutes to give an oral presentation of your testimony. Without objection, your written statement will be made part of the record. Ms. Gacki, you're now recognized for 5 minutes for your oral statement.
Thank you, Chairman Davidson, Ranking Member Beatty, Chair Hill, Ranking Member Waters, and distinguished members of this subcommittee. I thank you for the opportunity to testify here today on behalf of the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, or FinCEN. I want to say at the outset how much I appreciate the support of Congress and of the subcommittee in general in our collective efforts to combat illicit financial activity. Today, I plan to discuss how FinCEN has leveraged our tools to advance this administration's highest national security and law enforcement priorities to ultimately protect the lives and livelihoods of the American people. First, FinCEN is deploying our resources against a number of threat priorities, including countering cartels and drug trafficking, imposing maximum pressure on Iran, fighting child sexual exploitation, and combating fraud. In these remarks today, I want to focus a bit on our efforts to counter cartels and drug trafficking. In one of his first executive orders, President Trump established a policy of ensuring the total elimination of terrorist-designated cartels in the United States. To implement this policy this past June, pursuant to the Fentanyl Sanctions Act, FinCEN identified 3 Mexico-based financial institutions as being of primary money laundering concern in connection with illicit opioid trafficking. FinCEN also issued alerts to financial institutions targeting bulk cash smuggling by Mexico-based transnational criminal organizations, as well as oil smuggling schemes along the southwest border associated with Mexico-based cartels. We also published 2 comprehensive public financial trend analyses, one on fentanyl-related illicit finance, and one on the key role of Chinese money laundering networks to promote disruption of key vectors of illicit finance. And we have leveraged these publications in public-private partnerships in the fight against cartel finance. In June, we convened 2 FinCEN exchange events along the southwest border in Texas, focused on combating money movements associated with drug trafficking organizations. And this week, FinCEN and our Treasury colleagues are convening here in DC a cross-border dialogue together with the government of Mexico, the largest Mexican banks, and U.S. correspondent banks to further efforts to eliminate Mexico-based drug cartels on both sides of the border. Next, FinCEN is focused on efforts to streamline regulatory requirements and reduce industry compliance burdens, including through further implementation of the Anti-Money Laundering Act of 2020, so that the AML-CFT regime in the United States is risk-based and focused on the greatest threats to financial institutions and to national security. One key aspect of modernizing the Bank Secrecy Act regime involves reporting, especially suspicious activity reports, or SARs, and currency transaction reports, or CTRs. SARs and CTRs can provide critical information to law enforcement partners. However, FinCEN recognizes the burden this reporting imposes on institutions and individuals. We're currently exploring ways to streamline SAR and CTR reporting, including by improving the forms, which will be beneficial for law enforcement and national security data users, as well as for filers. And to further reduce the regulatory burden on U.S. companies and U.S. persons, FinCEN modified our approach to beneficial ownership information, which I look forward to discussing in this hearing. FinCEN is reviewing comments on the interim final rule issued this past March, and we intend to issue a final rule this upcoming year. Finally, let me highlight FinCEN's efforts to promote the administration's goal of supporting the responsible growth in use of digital assets. Digital assets, like other financial assets, are subject to misuse by illicit actors. To unleash the full potential of digital assets in the United States, certain measures should be adopted to deter illicit finance and combat financial crime that targets Americans. Faithfully and expeditiously implementing the Genius Act is one of those measures. As FinCEN initiates rulemaking efforts necessary to implement the Genius Act's required regulations, we'll continue our ongoing engagements with the digital asset industry and with law enforcement. And we also look forward to engaging with Financial Services Committee members as Congress considers further legislation in this area. Thank you again to this committee for your support and partnership in combating illicit finance, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Director Gacki. We'll now turn to member questions, and I recognize myself for 5 minutes for questioning. Director Gacki, in your very thorough opening statement and written testimony, I appreciate that you highlight your efforts and the efforts of FinCEN to counter cartels, to counter Iran and other threats to the United States, to confront human, sex, child trafficking, to look at scam centers that are exploiting our seniors in particular, and to modernize your tools that you're using both internally and also responding to the market in an era where digital assets have the opportunity to thrive, and people are also finding ways to use those, as they have every other form of payment, for illicit finance. So thank you for your work, and I appreciate your openness to some reforms on how to be more effective in that. And I want to highlight one of those is the beneficial ownership disclosure, because it seems that you've made a decision to be, frankly, to focus on collecting information about U.S. citizens differently than you collect about non-citizens. And I think that's important because our Constitution limits the ability to presume that someone's guilty of a crime. You're supposed to have probable cause and a warrant to get some information. Beneficial ownership, as drafted in the previous administration, basically assumed every business was engaged in illicit finance and they had to provide collected material. I think it's unconstitutional, but as the courts fight this out, you've stepped in. So could you give us an update on progress towards that and what issues would be helpful for Congress to clarify?
Thank you, Chair Davidson, for your question. And I also wanted to recognize the letter that you and other members and senators sent to Secretary Bessent yesterday on the Corporate Transparency Act and the way forward. And wanted to stress that the March 2025 interim final rule that FinCEN issued took a different approach consistent with administration priorities. As a career civil servant, I have served across administrations and am proud of my track record in implementing presidential policy. And the presidential policy changed with respect to the Corporate Transparency Act, focusing and making sure that the burdens on 30+ million small businesses were taken into account. And so FinCEN adjusted the reporting structure for the interim final rule in this past March and opened it up for questions. The present rule requires reports from foreign reporting companies that are not subject to any exemptions, and they are required only to report foreign beneficial owners. We intend to finalize this rule in the upcoming year. That's our public commitment. And we're working through administration, making sure we have administration guidance in, and working through the number of comments that we received to the interim final rule. And along with the resolution of the rule, we intend to resolve questions around the data that we gained and dispose of data that is no longer legally required to be filed. So we look forward to concluding that this year.
Yep, thank you, and I'll ask, without objection, unanimous consent to submit the letter that I sent to Secretary Bessent and others directing as addressed. So thank you for addressing that, and look forward to your answer and working with you to get the law to match what the administration's intent is, and I appreciate the effort, your effort and FinCEN's efforts to align there. I'd also like to ask unanimous consent, without objection, to submit for the record a press release from the Judiciary Committee on fraud. It's titled "Fraud on Act Blue. New report details potential illegal activity on the Democrat fundraising platform," from April 2nd, 2025. this is an example of, financial crime where people are being attributed to have given substantial sums of money, and then when they're interviewed, they don't even have that kind of money. They're not giving it, and the question is, where's that money coming from? Can you comment on that ongoing investigation?
Thank you, Chair Davidson. I know that my team is actively working with members in Congress to review our data to ensure that we are providing up-to-date information on that ongoing investigation.
Are you working with the Department of Justice on it?
We're working with congressional oversight committees looking into this.
So at this point, DOJ's inactive?
I'm sorry, I do not know the status of DOJ's.
But they're not active with FinCEN?
Well, DOJ has access to our data.
Correct.
And they are able to view it, consistent with the protections we have in place. And I defer to them on their investigation.
Thank you. My time has expired. I now recognize the ranking member of the subcommittee, Ms. Beatty from Ohio, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for that response to the chairman's last question about the investigation with Act Blue. We know investigations, whether it's Act Blue or the Epstein files, go both ways with what we're looking at and what we read in articles. And I note that we are moving forward looking at the Epstein files as well. But that's an aside. Let me say thank you again, because last year I had the distinct honor of having you in my district with former Undersecretary Nelson for our small business information session on the beneficial ownership rule. At that event, we talked at great length about how critical this information is to law enforcement, and many of them were present in our AML-CFT regime. Let's fast forward to March of this year, and the Trump administration has done a total about-face, violating the clear intent of the Congress to include domestic companies that are not otherwise exempt from the law. In my opinion, they were included because, in fact, there had been crime with the domestic companies. Director Gacki, we applaud you for working across all lines, but my question is, do you still agree that domestic companies could present a money laundering risk?
Ranking Member Beatty, thank you so much for that excellent question. I want to thank you for welcoming me to your district last year. It was a terrific experience to get to interact with your constituents. And I do want to step back and reiterate that as a career civil servant working across administrations, I will implement the policy of the administration as it applies to beneficial ownership information. And I would say for the current administration has taken a look at the reporting structure and assessed that the burdens on small business fell too greatly and needed to be alleviated. And that is what FinCEN did through the interim final rule. However, as you point out, there are still instances where domestic shell companies can be leveraged in financial crime. And there I can point to other sources of information that can help law enforcement if the beneficial ownership information regime is not being used. For example, FinCEN's customer due diligence rule on financial institutions does require collection of information at the point at which accounts are opened. And financial transactions and financial accounts are usually critical to all forms of shell companies in the United States. That being said, we will be carefully reviewing the responses to our interim final rule to see if any adjustments need to take place. As this is an ongoing open rulemaking, I can't discuss the ultimate resolution of that, but we look forward to reviewing all comments on all sides of the beneficial ownership issue.
Thank you. Then let me make this comment, and I'll phrase it versus in a question to what I believe. I believe that it is accurate to say that the Treasury's recent decision to exclude domestic reporting companies from enforcement exempts the vast majority, I believe roughly 99% of covered entities from the reporting rule. Also, I believe that, therefore, this decision to exempt U.S. companies makes it easier for fentanyl traffickers and other criminals to launder money through the United States, endangering the safety of our constituents. Don't want to put you on the spot. There are many who believe that. We have records to show from drug trafficking coming into Ohio and across many of our highways. So let me just say that I'm going to continue to be an advocate against illicit crimes. And if that means us doing due diligence of asking for information about who owns a business, I'm a business owner. You would have no reason in supplying the information, and I suggest to some of my colleagues, if they pull up the form and look at the questions that are being asked, they appear to me to be standard questions that any business doing good business, legal business, should want to do. And thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you.
Thank the ranking member. The gentleman from Arkansas, the chairman of the full committee, Mr. Hill, is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman. Both before and after the passage of the Corporate Transparency Act back in 2021, I spent a lot of time advocating for alternatives to the rulemaking that was taken, and even the statutory language that the Congress agreed to in an NDAA amendment. That includes debating vigorously with former Ways and Means Chair Brady and former Treasury Secretary Mnuchin. I've advocated isn't there a better way, instead of creating a new database that can be breached, hacked, collecting more information that can only be filed online for 32 million small businesses, every heating and cooling owner out there with a truck and 3 employees is going to be captured by this, for example. And while, as I've noted in my opening comments, the March interim rule was helpful, I think there's a better way, which is simply using the existing Form 1065, which every pass-through entity has to file, and the resulting K-1s that are issued. And let me say in front of the whole committee, why was that not treated as a real possibility? Number one, the Ways and Means Committee said, and the Treasury said, we just don't want any more exceptions to sharing IRS data. Well, there are 35 or so now. And if this is such a national security essential element, why wouldn't this be a worthy additional sharing? Under CTA, companies are required to report 4 key pieces of information: full legal name, date of birth, current address, and a unique identifier. And of course, that's all available except for the birth date, which I think we can figure out. I believe we have open source data on everybody's birthday. We'll refer the FinCEN to Facebook for that if you need help on that. But I really think that this is a better approach. You don't have to express an opinion on it. You're implementing the law. I got it. But I think this is a good opportunity to illustrate we never, ever really tried to minimize the cost of 32 million people. Wouldn't you agree, though, that this would be an easier way to use data that the federal government already has legal access to?
Chair Hill, thank you so much for that question and those excellent points. And I appreciate your focus on this issue. And I think that the idea that the congressional and executive branches should look at existing pools of data and determine how best to use those in the first instance is very well taken. And I look forward to working with Treasury leadership on this particular issue to explore whether this is a possibility.
Thank you for that. Let me switch subjects to the important one of geographic targeting orders, which has been actually a big successful strategy of FinCEN for many decades and was actually tackling the issue of shell companies and people hiding assets. But there's been a recent change, which is that there's a new nationwide rule as opposed to a limited geography, requiring real estate professionals to report all non-finance purchases of real estate. And according to FinCEN's estimates, the real estate industry is expected to bear over $630 million in compliance costs, or about $600 per report filed, based on some 850,000 transactions a year. based on our years of experience with geographic targeting, how do you justify that cost related to the actual crime, law enforcement goals being obtained, I should say?
Thank you, Chair Hill. And I think, to the point FinCEN has been issuing, using the tool of the geographic targeting order for 10 years across administrations to seek information on shell companies, legal entities purchasing real estate in a non-financed way. And the thing about the geographic targeting order is it's a temporary measure that can only be renewed if there is a law enforcement need for that information. And across 10 years, we have seen an incredible thirst among law enforcement for this information, and this information being used in active and successful law enforcement prosecutions. And that drove the decision to make what was a temporary measure into a permanent measure, widely applicable, to be the residential real estate rule, which is scheduled to come into effect in December 2025. We do think the benefits of this data—
If you could provide me some of that information in writing, and then also the results of the law enforcement successes in the past decade, that would be helpful, and I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Chairman. A gentlewoman from California, the ranking member of the full committee, Ms. Waters, is now recognized for 5 minutes.
And thank you very much. Director Gacki, last month your agency, FinCEN, sounded the alarm on Chinese money laundering networks. In more than a dozen examples, you warned that these organizations use U.S. and foreign corporate structures to hide, launder money, park assets, and repatriate the illicit funds from criminal activities, including human trafficking and smuggling across and beyond the southwest border. Yes or no? Was Undersecretary of Treasury for Terrorism and Financial Intelligence, John K. Hurley, correct when he stated on the documents released that the Chinese money laundering network enabled cartels to, quote, poison Americans with fentanyl, conduct human trafficking, and wreak havoc among communities across our great nation?
Yes, ma'am. When Undersecretary Hurley said that statement, we have seen Chinese money laundering networks to be a prevalent form of money laundering that are increasingly being leveraged by cartels to facilitate narcotics trafficking. It is taking advantage of laws both in Mexico and in the People's Republic of China against funds flows out of those countries or into those countries of US dollars. And there is an informal, decentralized network being leveraged by cartels to launder the sums being used to export narcotics and other drugs to the United States.
Thank you for that. I want to move on to some work that I've been doing on the Caribbean on de-risking. In 2023, as required by the Anti-Money Laundering Act of 2020, the Treasury Department released its U.S. government-wide de-risking strategy, having worked for years with those most heavily impacted by de-risking, including many Caribbean nations and territories that are effectively cut off from the international banking community. I was pleased to see the release of this strategy. Its importance was underscored at a 2022 hearing that I chaired, where Prime Minister Mia Amor Motley of Barbados gave historic testimony about the negative effects of de-risking on the people and businesses in the region. The Treasury strategy recommended several follow-up actions, including a joint study by the Federal Banking Agency and FinCEN, revision of money, service, business oversight standards, and improvement of international cooperation. Can you please elaborate on what exactly FinCEN and partner Treasury offices have done to pursue the steps laid out in the strategy? What does your agency have planned for the next year related to de-risking, especially in the Caribbean region, or especially related to access to correspondent banking service?
Ranking Member Waters, thank you for that question and for your longstanding interest in this issue. I want to assure you that since the President issued an executive order this past August guaranteeing fair banking for all Americans, Treasury is working to implement the President's executive order to guarantee that for all Americans. But beyond that, for many years, FinCEN has noted that its policies should not equate to the de-risking of populations. So I want to focus on FinCEN's work here in the broader on the broader Treasury response to de-risking. I look forward to getting back to you and your staff on that. But as FinCEN noticed in a statement on customer due diligence issued by FinCEN and the federal banking agencies, banks that operate in compliance with their Bank Secrecy Act obligations and effectively mitigate and manage their illicit finance risks are not prohibited or discouraged from providing banking customers of any specific class or type. And I look forward to working with our federal banking agency colleagues to further clarify that as needed.
Thank you. I'm just interested in follow-up to see if changes should be made based on a long-time policy. What kind of factual information is being used in examining this de-risking issue?
Absolutely. We'll get back to you on that.
Thank the ranking member. The gentleman from Oklahoma is the chairman of the Monetary Policy Task Force. Mr. Lucas is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you for holding this hearing, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Director Gacki, for testifying today. Director Gacki, fraud in our financial service system continues to be one of the top burdens facing my home state. Can you detail FinCEN's approach to dealing with this problem? The folks back home want to see some more progress.
Thank you, Representative Lucas. This is a huge issue for us at FinCEN and across the Treasury Department. And in fact, in many money laundering risk assessments facing the United States, fraud is the crime, it is the highest revenue-generating crime that features money laundering. And this has been proven time and again, and it's growing at an exorbitant pace. So FinCEN this is one of the key areas that FinCEN is dedicated to. And let me outline a few things that we're doing on this. First, we're trying to educate financial institutions as to markers of fraud so that they can be on the front end deterring this and stopping this. We've issued financial trend analyses, for example, on elder financial exploitation. Just earlier this past summer, we issued an alert on the abuse of convertible virtual currency kiosks and how they can be used in in any financial exploitations. Just yesterday, we issued an alert on the troubling pattern of sextortion, a very specific type of fraud. Not only are we focused on different fraud typologies and making sure financial institutions are tracking that, but we're also actively working on repatriating funds that are taken by means of fraud. FinCEN has an active program called the Rapid Response Program that focuses on the fraud typology of business email compromise. And we work closely with the FBI and with Secret Service and IRS criminal investigations, where we can work through international counterparts to freeze or repatriate funds taken from Americans and brought overseas. Since the inception of that program, we have repatriated over $1 billion, and this is a incredible program that we look forward to building and developing to bring really meaningful action to ordinary Americans. And then finally, I just want to note the day-to-day, everyday case support we do for fraud investigations across the United States at every level of law enforcement, state, local, federal, to make sure that Americans are getting the help they need to stop these vectors of fraud.
Director, I'd like to follow up on that question. Part of the problem seems to be that FinCEN is overwhelmed with data. sometimes immaterial data that dilutes the helpful information the agency could use. Have you considered focusing reporting obligations so that FinCEN only receives relevant information for law enforcement investigations?
Thank you, Representative Lucas. Yes, and this is, I think, a broader part of modernizing the Bank Secrecy Act regime. And very much one key element of that is making sure that financial institutions, be it AML CFT programs, are consistent with the law, that they are effective and risk-based, and that they are producing information that is valid to law enforcement. We are in the midst of a Treasury-wide exploration of how to reform the Bank Secrecy Act regime in the United States. And one part of that, a key part of that, is reporting, including suspicious activity reports and currency transaction reports. We should be collecting information that is truly important to law enforcement and national security. And to the extent that requires adjustments of the types of information that we ask for to simplify the forms and the thresholds, we are actively exploring that and hoping to bring it to conclusion as soon as possible.
Let me simply note that it looks as though FinCEN has increased the administrative burdens on small business and credit providers in many ways without seeing results. I just simply suggest that a targeted approach might allow for better outcomes and a more enthusiastic support from the providers of that information. And with that, I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Chairman. The gentleman from California who's the ranking member of the Monetary Policy Task Force, Mr. Vargas, is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And again, I want to thank you for conducting this hearing and thanking the ranking member and, of course, the director. Mr. Chairman, at the beginning, you talked about the surveillance machine. It really caught my attention because I think that generally falls within the perspective or ideology of a lot of my friends on the Republican side, that government should be limited, that we shouldn't have the intrusion of government into our private lives, that there has to be a balance. And I normally fall on the side of saying, you know, government is generally good, and I'm very supportive of government in general. But I have to say, it's been fascinating to see under this administration how incredibly intrusive the government has grown, not only into our private lives, but interestingly now into business. I mean, we see government now taking positions in individual companies. And that used to be called socialism. It used to be called, you know, entities owned by the government. I understand we have GSEs. These are private companies that, you know, Congress created to make sure that there was liquidity in the secondary mortgage market. And there's stuff like that. But taking positions, picking losers, picking winners, has normally not been the ideology of the Republicans. And yet you see that in this administration, and you don't see much talk about it on the other side, saying, wait a minute, if the Democrats had done this, the Democrats had put all this surveillance on the streets, what we see now, the militarization that we see, there would have been, of course, people screaming left and right because of the intrusion of government into our lives. And I understand that, but we don't see it now. And again, I caution you because there will be a time when the government flips and you will say, well, wait a minute, you can't do this. Well, we'll remind you that you didn't say anything when the Trump administration did it. And it really is sad to see. Because again, I'm not one that's against government. I think government generally does a good job, but I've always admired the Republicans, really starting with Reagan, saying there should be some limit here as to the intrusion that government has in our lives. But you've seen the creep become a race now, not a creep, it's incredible the way this administration has really put the federal government into our lives. I mean, even going to the airport, they take all of this information, this biometric information. I don't know what they do with it. Maybe you do, Director, I don't know. But someone must know. But all that being said, I do want to talk about elder abuse. You spoke about it a little bit, but I do want to get into it a little bit more. You did say in April of 2024, you published a financial trend analysis and looked at the patterns and data of the elder financial exploitation. According to this analysis, between June 2022 and June 2023, FinCEN received more than 155,000 elder financial exploitation reports associated with more than $27 billion in reported suspicious activity. The filings show that scams accounted for 80% of the reported elder financial exploitation activity. What role does FinCEN play in addressing this financial exploitation against older adults?
Thank you, Representative Vargas. And yes, so the financial trend analysis on elder financial exploitation and different guidance guidance products that we have issued ask filers, financial institutions, to use those as guideposts to provide us with financial intelligence that law enforcement can action to actually go after those perpetrators of fraud against our elderly population. And so not only does FinCEN play a role at educating financial institutions as to what to look for, so we get high-quality financial intelligence, but we also actively support law enforcement.
So how do you use AI if you do? Because I know my time's going to run out. How do you use AI to do this?
So there is of course, it's an administration priority to incorporate the use of artificial intelligence tools to analyze data. And FinCEN, like other federal government agencies, is exploring that. We do use advanced artificial intelligence products in terms of machine learning and other data analytics because FinCEN does collect and protect a large amount of data in order to truly support law enforcement with the highest quality information.
My time has expired, but thank you. Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Vargas. I would like to recognize the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Sessions, for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Ms. Gacki. I appreciate you being here. I'd like to ask for your help in helping me work through not the entirety, but what you have discussed here today about drug cartels, movement of money, but directly related to what is called anti-laundering regulations for residential real estate transfers. So can you talk with me about that, the need for that information? I'm old enough where I've run across people asking information when I paid cash for things, and they were very specific of things that they wanted that were personal to me and not part of the transaction. Can you talk with me about that part of what FinCEN has done?
Absolutely. Thank you, Representative Sessions, for that question. So for the past 10 years, at the request of law enforcement, FinCEN has sought, through use of a temporary measure, the geographic targeting order, information on non-financed, all-cash purchases of real estate if they're done not by an individual, but by a shell company. So two important caveats there. These are not financed mortgage, there's no mortgage lender involved at all, no financial institution.
So nothing about what you have done would get in the process of an individual buying property on a cash basis.
That's right. The residential real estate rule, which makes permanent the temporary measure of the geographic targeting order, is focused on entities, legal entities that are doing this purchasing and seeks reporting on those. And there are exceptions to those too. So for example, if the disposition of a property, for example, is by court order, it could be a settlement of an estate or something, that would not be covered by our rule. I'd be happy to work with your team to understand.
Well, I'm the one that's got the problem with it, not my team. Specifically, what happened is when I went to file for a loan, they requested information that I considered private and extraneous to that information, but they wanted it, personal private data and information. And so I moved into just to use cash instead of providing what I consider to be unprofessional asking of personal data. So you're telling me there's nothing, I would not be caught up in that, you would not be looking at that, only where there is a shell company that is considered shell attempting to purchase real estate.
That's correct, Mr. Sessions. It is a rule that is looking to pierce who are the real people behind the shell companies making cash purchases of real estate, not individuals.
Good. Well, I would reiterate, and I had not talked to the chairman about this, but in listening to the chairman about data and information that's being held by you or any other government, really anybody that is subject to being stolen by people. And what is the retention period that you generally have on issues that may have been in the past where you had completed the investigation? What do you do with that data, and what is the time frame that you would keep it? Is there a retention period?
Thank you, Mr. Sessions. So the information that we hold that's filed by under the Bank Secrecy Act that FinCEN collects, disseminates, protects, is held at the highest level of data protection for non-classified systems in the United States government. And in terms of a retention period, this is something.
Where is that in the United States government?
Excuse me, where is the data or the rules?
You said it's being held by at the highest security. Well, obviously, Social Security is high also, and those files are purged. What is, if you could please have your staff get back to me in a detailed fashion and tell me about the retention of data, not in an active investigation, but some that may have been, that would have been completed or that was requested and not needed, what that retention is, where it goes, and how long it's been kept.
Absolutely, sir.
I would appreciate that. When do you anticipate that you would provide that?
Sir, we will get that to you in the next few weeks.
Good. Thank you very much. Mr. Chairman, I want to thank you for holding this, and I thank Ms. Gacki for taking time to be here to help me clear up a question that I had. I yield back my time.
Yeah, thank you. The gentleman from California, Mr. Liccardo, is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to thank you and your team, Ms. Gacki, Director Gacki, for the really important work that FinCEN does. I was a federal prosecutor many years ago and relied frequently on the great work of FinCEN as we were prosecuting narco trafficking at the border. And in particular, we are seeing more and more of the illegal transactions relating to money laundering occurring in crypto as well as fraud. And I commend you and your team for the work that you've recently done on convertible virtual currency kiosks or crypto ATMs, which I know has been a particular source for FinCEN and a lot of law enforcement. And in your August statement, you acknowledge that there's rising fraud and cybercrime and drug trafficking through these kiosks. And I presume that the concern arises because of this pseudonymity that relates to crypto transactions. Is that right? It's difficult often for people to identify who exactly is doing the transacting.
Thank you, Representative Liccardo, for that question. I think yes, there can be some anonymity-enhancing aspects to convertible virtual currency. I do know that our team works very closely and uses blockchain analytic tools in order to be able to aid investigations to ensure that that doesn't remain a barrier, and to put out guidance for financial institutions to be alert to any aspects of the misuse of these types of tools.
And particularly with the use of mixers and other tools, criminals are able to evade even some of the more sophisticated detection techniques in terms of identifying them. Is that right?
Yes, sir. Now, mixers are something that we're currently taking a look at. We issued a proposed rule on mixers in the previous administration and are exploring the next step on that. We have to take a look at the fact that we have to make sure that we tailor any approach here to be really directed at illicit activity, and that we are not sweeping in any legitimate transactions that are trying to leverage, these tools to, for example, shield their transactions from repressive regimes. It's a delicate thing. We've got to work through administration guidance, and I look forward to engaging with you on it.
And I recognize that there's legislation pending, the Clarity Act, in which we are looking to impose BSA requirements to help you do your job and law enforcement do your job with regard to centralized exchanges. But of course, there's also decentralized finance, DeFi, where there are no such requirements. How exactly are you able to do your job when millions of dollars may be moving through DeFi, particularly given recent studies that showed as recently as January that 91% of fraud and theft that was occurring in the 1,100 cases that was examined under this study, 91% was happening on DeFi protocols. What tools do you have left?
Thank you, Representative. This is something that we are actively working on, not just in implementing different reporting and different exploratory subjects set forth in the Genius Act, of which FinCEN is a critical implementer, but also outcomes from the President's Working Group on Digital Assets and the report there. So looking at DeFi, looking at the appropriate requirements for the Bank Secrecy Act requirements for that industry is something that my agency is taking on, and we look forward to working with both industry and law enforcement to make sure we're striking the right balance.
Perhaps I can just, given my limited time, identify my big concern. Right now, your agency, through its rulemaking, has decided that it would not collect beneficial ownership information from U.S. corporations or U.S. persons. And all that's required to satisfy those standard beneficial ownership information requests is the name, date of birth, residential street address, and the ID from your driver's license. That's all it's required. And we know that U.S. companies, shell companies, can be created to move millions of dollars, billions of dollars through these illicit channels using DeFi. You won't be able to identify, nobody will identify who these folks are because we don't have BOI requirements and you don't have any mechanism for identifying who they are on DeFi protocols.
The gentleman's time
Doesn't this create an
expired.
enormous opportunity for criminals?
The gentleman's time has expired. I'd encourage follow-up in writing, and as we'll have additional questions submitted for the record. I'd like to recognize the gentleman from Texas, who's also the chairman of the Small Business Committee, Mr. Williams, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for being here today. FinCEN's beneficial ownership reporting regime created a compliance nightmare for small business owners in my home state of Texas and across the nation. While I was pleased to see that Treasury was issuing an interim final rule that would require only foreign companies to report their BOI to FinCEN, I am still concerned about the data on domestic small businesses that was collected before the change in reporting requirements. By holding on to this data, FinCEN has created unnecessary privacy and security risks for millions of small businesses across this great country. So, Director Gacki, will you commit to deleting the beneficial ownership information of business owners who are no longer required to file with FinCEN?
Representative Williams, thank you so much for that question. And with the interim final rule that was issued in March, as you noted, FinCEN has readjusted the requirements for filing to really put the obligations only on foreign reporting companies and only to the extent they have foreign beneficial owners. We are in the process of reviewing the comments to that rule, and we expect to make that rule final this calendar year. With the finalization of that rule, we expect to resolve any data questions involving the data that we have. And it is our intention along with resolution and finalization of that rule to delete any information that was filed that is no longer required to be filed that is currently being protected at FinCEN.
Thank you. I want to shift gears and discuss the residential real estate transfer rule. Now, this rule requires a certain business involved in real estate closings and settlements to collect and report beneficial ownership information nationwide. In practice, more than 800,000 individuals would be required to file reports, resulting in over 4 million hours of compliance work. The estimated cost of this burden is an astonishing $630 million, according to some of FinCEN's estimates. These compliance costs will inevitably raise the price of purchasing a home, making it even harder for families to achieve the American dream of ownership. So, Director, again, given this rule raises compliance hours and costs at an alarming level, is FinCEN considering delaying this rule to improperly rescope it in a way that it does not create so much regulatory burden on small business?
Representative Williams, thank you again for that excellent question. We believe that the residential real estate rule puts in place what had been a temporary measure across 10 years of collecting information from shell companies making non-finance purchases of real estate that has been incredibly beneficial to law enforcement. And we have renewed that geographic targeting order across administrations based on the strength of the reporting of the information and how vital it is for law enforcement. We believe that the benefits to the United States, to Americans, in gaining this information is critical and justifies the expense of the residential real estate rule. And in fact, we believe that the ensuring that shell companies purchasing purchasing residential real estate in a way that's not been detected can actually skew home prices, and which is another justification for why this rule is, we believe, is justified. And we do expect, we are planning for it to come into effect in December.
Okay, last question real quick. The residential real estate transfers rule, like the beneficial ownership reporting requirements, will affect a large number of small businesses. As we saw from the beneficial ownership information reporting requirements, millions of small businesses in the United States were largely unaware that they had to comply and were even unaware of the existence of FinCEN. My concern is that similar to as before, small businesses like title companies will not be educated on those requirements and unfairly punished for something they are unfamiliar with. So, Director, quickly, this new residential rule shifts a heavy burden on title companies, many of which are small businesses, and given the complexity of the rule, what has FinCEN done to educate and prepare these companies? And has FinCEN engaged directly with title professionals and issued any public guidance to help them understand and comply?
Thank you, Representative Williams, and thank you for that another excellent question. We have been working with title companies on education, but if we determine that more time is needed for them to be able to implement this rule, we will certainly explore methods and ways to give them that additional time to ensure a responsible implementation of this rule.
All right, thank you very much. I yield my time back.
Thank you, Mr. Williams. I now recognize the gentleman from Kentucky, Mr. Barr, who's also the chairman of the Subcommittee on Financial Institutions, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Gacki, thank you for your service. FinCEN is responsible for issuing guidance for Section 314B of the Patriot Act, which allows financial institutions to share information with one another regarding activities that may involve money laundering or terrorism. Only 3,626 banks out of the approximately 9,148 banks and credit unions nationwide are actually registered to share information. And in the Commonwealth of Kentucky, only 47 financial institutions out of 178 participate in 314B data sharing. Director Gacki, I have heard from community banks in Kentucky that there is a lack of clarity with the current guidance on the safe harbor on what is permissible to share. If FinCEN's guidance better outlined what data is covered under the safe harbor and promoted more fraud information sharing, it is likely more institutions would participate. What is FinCEN doing to increase the uptake in this data sharing?
Representative Barr, thank you for that excellent question. The 314B program is an important one for FinCEN, and we want to ensure that financial institutions are leveraging the information sharing potential involved in that. To the extent your banks in Kentucky or banks elsewhere are asking for greater clarity on the safe harbor, I can commit that as something we will look into and explore providing it. This is something that we use our FinCEN exchange events to ensure are as well understood, but if greater guidance is needed here, I will certainly look into it.
Thank you very much for your attention to that concern. Also, if there's one complaint or concern that community financial institutions raise with me, it's the prevalence and increased prevalence of fraud in our financial system. And you noted in your written testimony that cyber-enabled fraud remains elevated, and increased reports of fraud and cyber crime. We're seeing upticks in that reporting every single year. Elder financial exploitation, government benefits fraud, digital asset investment scams, account takeover attacks, AI-enabled fraud. So lots of theft. What is, and just you've talked a little bit about this in your testimony, but can you amplify FinCEN's focus on this and how you can help financial institutions that want to do right by their customers and limit their exposure to fraud?
Absolutely, Representative Barr. So I think, making sure that financial institutions have the tools they need to help detect it, whether through alerts, advisories, financial trend analyses, through exchange events where we bring law enforcement together with financial institutions and public-private events to ensure that there's a direct communication to act as that critical juncture between law enforcement and banks of all sizes, financial institutions of all sizes, to ensure their data, that they're looking for what law enforcement needs and helping protect their customers and in turn the American people. That is absolutely something. I should also note that another thing that FinCEN does is we also have our own targeting authority through special measures to look at foreign actors of primary money laundering concern that are engaging in fraudulent activity. We took one action this past year against Way1 Group, based in Cambodia, which was being used as a vector for elder financial exploitation, for pig butchering and the like. We issued a notice of proposed rule that we hope to make final soon, but that was a way in which we could look at a critical external node for fraud and stop it and help financial institutions detect it in their own systems.
Thank you. My final time, there's a narrative that, and critics of the innovation in crypto and digital assets that the movement of transactions to the blockchain creates additional fraud risks and risks for criminal activity. Can you share FinCEN's views on how the movement of transactions to the blockchain actually could assist in law enforcement in preventing fraud, criminal activity, money laundering, and the like?
Thank you, Representative Barr, and I know that I have very little time, but I can tell you that, yes, the blockchain actually brings transparency, and with the right tools, you can use it to leverage, to really help detect illicit transactions for law enforcement, and I'm happy to engage with you.
Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Barr. The gentlewoman from California, Ms. Kim, is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Davison. I want to thank Ms. Gacki for joining us today. Last year, FinCEN finalized the residential real estate transfer rulemaking that required title insurers to provide FinCEN with the names of the individuals who purchased a home valued more than $300,000 in Southern California and utilize certain forms of payment. I want you to know in Southern California, especially in Orange County, where I represent, the median home price there is over $900,000, almost $1 million. And that placed a high burden on many of my constituents who own small family-run title insurance companies. And in FinCEN's economic analysis, of the residential real estate reporting rule, they estimate that the first-year compliance cost could reach close to $560 million. So can you talk about how FinCEN will tailor your approach to this issue so California's small businesses are not unfairly burdened by duplicative or low-value reporting requirements?
Thank you, Representative Kim, for that question. And we are working very closely in implementation of the residential real estate rule with organizations that represent title companies to ensure that the requirements are well understood and that they're implemented in as cost-effective and efficient manner as possible. And to ensure that small businesses, like the title companies in Southern California, have adequate resources and knowledge to implement this, it's certainly something we will explore to ensure they have enough time and resources.
Exchange with my colleagues earlier, you talked about GTO, Geographic Targeting Order. You said that that is a temporary tool that is used by law enforcement, and the success of it made it permanent. But the comments and the feedback that I'm hearing from my constituents about that is that there is such little understanding about how that information the FinCEN is collecting is actually helpful. So can you talk about how FinCEN is utilizing the data from the real estate GEO?
Absolutely. Thank you, Representative Kim. So the data is made available and accessible to law enforcement users at local, state, federal, and national security professionals across the country. We have almost 25,000 law enforcement users across, 400 different agencies in the United States at all levels accessing this information. This provides critical tip and lead information that has proven vital to successful prosecutions for crimes such as narcotics trafficking, to include fentanyl, for fraud, for terrorist-related actions across the country. I'd be happy to give you more specific details in a follow-up conversation.
All right, let's talk about that, the residential real estate rule once again. It places much of the reporting responsibility on title companies. And there is over 90% of the companies being small businesses. I want to ask you what steps you are using. I know it was already discussed regarding the education, regarding preparing the industry for that complex rule. You did say FinCEN is doing your best to educate the industry, but I would like to take you up on that offer and see if you can come to my district and have a roundtable discussion with my constituents, my title insurance companies in my district. That would be very helpful, and I'm happy to put together a roundtable discussion with you.
We would welcome that opportunity. Thank you very much.
Great. All right. However, I remain concerned that the expansion of the residential real estate rulemaking nationwide will only hurt these family-owned small businesses, and the implementation of the nationwide GTO, which starts on December 1st, it seems like far too little time to give these small businesses time to prepare. So to that end, I'd like to submit this letter that I received from the American Land Title Association into the record, and it highlights their concerns with the timeline and the impacts that this will have on the title industry. So I hope you will consider delaying, review this and delay the implementation of this nationwide GTO and continue to work with the industry so we can find effective and efficient ways to fight the money laundering.
Without objection.
Thank you.
The gentleman's time's expired, and the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Foster, who's also the chairman of the Subcommittee on Financial Institutions, now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair Davidson, and thank you for joining us, Director Gacki. Now, Director Gacki, in November of last year, FinCEN issued an alert warning for financial institutions about the increase in identity fraud schemes associated with the use of deepfakes and created with generative AI tools. Criminals are using Gen AI to cheaply mass-produce false identity documents and circumvent live identity verification and authentication methods in online transaction. I appreciate FinCEN's efforts to raise awareness of these scams, and I encourage you to do more, because it's clear that Gen AI and the deepfakes that they produce will continue to become more believable and accessible as time goes by. Now, I believe the best tool that we have at our disposal today to verify identities online is a form of secure digital ID. And the tool at hand is the mobile driver's licenses currently being issued by several states. And in fact, most countries, including all countries of the EU. Digital IDs can allow consumers to prove they are who they say they are in online transactions. A verified credential attached to a secure mobile device creates a reliable system that's extremely difficult to fake. I believe this technology would go a long way towards stopping identity fraud in the banking system, and also with fraud in government benefits. It is, however, my understanding that many financial firms do not feel that they have the regulatory go-ahead to start using digital IDs and digital driver's licenses in their AML KYC processes, and that they need guidance from regulatory agencies like FinCEN to start implementing this technology in online transactions. I think there's also a federal role in providing federal standards for what states are providing adequate digital driver's license, and some may need improvements. So my question is, do you expect FinCEN will take steps to provide the clarity, regulatory clarity, for firms to start using these for KYC purposes in online transactions?
Thank you, Representative Foster, for that excellent question. And I also want to thank you for your focus on this issue across many years. I want to note that this is certainly something that FinCEN is looking at. Questions of identity are critical to our work on fraud. And the misuse and of identity, whether it's using generative AI or less sophisticated techniques, is something that we are very, very much focused on and looking to ensure that we are providing the best guidance we can to financial institutions. I would like to, I want to commit that I will work with my federal banking agency colleagues to look at what further guidance we can provide to financial institutions on this matter. This past year, we did work with our with our federal banking agency colleagues to work on how to adjust how financial institutions can adjust their processes, including in terms of collecting and verifying taxpayer identification numbers and use of customer identification programs. But I look forward to looking at this more closely and seeing what we need to modernize in terms of guidance for financial institutions going forward.
Yeah, thank you. And I think there's also an important federal role that doesn't yet exist, which is to verify, to specify which cell phones are actually safe to deploy digital IDs on them. Because it's well documented that certain early model cell phones had a secure enclave that was not in fact secure, meaning that someone could go and hack your cell phone and impersonate your digital driver's license, which would obviously be a disaster if someone used them. So we will need at some point probably a federal agency or someone they delegated to call balls and strikes on this version of a cell phone is okay, it's got an adequately secure enclave, this one cannot be used. That's sort of being done by Apple in its ecosystem by just saying we're not supporting the iOS for once phones get old enough. The Android system is a complete, so it's less organized, and it will be difficult to do that. But this is an important role. And if you could, for the record, come back and give us some suggestions on what is needed there to specify when we can trust the silicon in different versions of cell phones and where that federal agency is best housed. Because right now, DOD does some of it and other agencies do some of it, but there isn't an organized standard federal way to do that. And I think it's a missing piece here. Thank you. My time is up.
Thank you, Mr. Foster. The gentleman from Tennessee, Mr. Ogles, is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the Director for being here and answering the questions so thoroughly. I do want to perhaps emphasize, what may be the key takeaway as you hear everyone, and I want to compliment or echo Mr. Foster here in a moment, but when you look at Mr. Sessions asked about the data retention period. Mr. Williams asked about the notion of will you delete data that otherwise would no longer be collected? And then I would also take that a step further, that if you've collected data and there's been an investigation and someone's been cleared, then will that data be deleted because it's no longer necessary? And we've seen federal agencies like Treasury have some security breaches, security issues. And so the idea that this data is somehow impenetrable or safe, I think, is a bit of a misnomer when we've seen systems all across, our government, quite frankly, have failures in that security. We know that China and other, adverse, hostile entities and nations are trying to get access to this data. So I think it's important that we address this data issue, this data retention issue, and have very clear parameters, and quite frankly, aggressive parameters in deleting that data versus housing it in perpetuity because of the risks associated therein. And again, even in your own comments, you talked about data security and the issues with trafficking and fentanyl and such. That's not your average small business owner who's having to report and suddenly has a vulnerability out there. But with that, thank you for addressing those, and we look forward to getting that information back from you. I know we've seen roughly 100,000 Americans die every year from drug overdoses, most from fentanyl, and Treasury itself has linked Mexican banks and cross-border cash flows to the cartels financing that flow and that poison. How many American overdose deaths can be traced back to the laundering networks running through Mexican banks like Cibanco, Intercam, or Vector? And why is FinCEN still granting them extensions instead of cutting them off from the U.S. financial system immediately?
Thank you, Representative Ogles, for those comments and for that excellent question. I don't have an answer on the number of deaths that can be traced back to these financial institutions. It's certainly something that we can try to estimate. But I will say that any death would be too much, right? Sure. And so, but what we found in publicly calling out these three financial institutions as a primary money laundering concern is we made a very public case as to how they have supported cartel financing. The extensions we have granted in terms of the effective date have, as we've noted in public, because we've been working so closely with the Mexican government, which has taken over those financial institutions, including replacing the heads of their compliance departments at these financial institutions. It's important when we took action against these financial institutions that we also made sure that any innocent people, to include innocent Americans, innocent Mexican citizens, were able to extricate their funds from these institutions. And that's what the time period of a delayed implementation was able to accomplish. But meanwhile, we have been working very closely with the Mexican government to ensure that these financial institutions are being effectively regulated at the local level in Mexico, and that any further money laundering concerns have been removed.
Well, and I appreciate that, but I also want to give caution, and we've seen that, most, if not all, of the institutions in Mexico are infected with cartel operatives. So this idea that they are going to self-regulate is, I think, somewhat laughable. And so at the end of the day, this is about outcomes. Are you ceasing the flow of illegal funds into the United States and back to Mexico, which is flooding our streets and killing our kids? And if you're not, then you need to shut it down. Whether you like the president or not, I happen to be an ally, an advocate for the president. Crime has come to a halt in this city because the president had a will to do so. The former administration said we couldn't secure the border. In a matter of days, the border was secure. We have to have the will to show Mexico, the cartels, and any of their associates that if you mess with the United States of America, we will shut you down, period. And again, they're not necessarily our ally when they're allowing the killing of our children and flooding our streets with illicit drugs. With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Ogles. The gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Caston, is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for being here. I want to follow up on the discussion you had with Mr. Liccardo around crypto ATMs. Mr. Chairman, I'd ask unanimous consent to enter into the record a Chicago Sun-Times article titled "Chicago's Crypto ATMs Are Magnets for Drug Dealing and Scams on Older Adults." This has been a particular issue in Illinois, but obviously nationwide. I think in 2024, the FBI had received more than 10,000 complaints about crypto ATMs and reported more than $246 million in losses. In August, FinCEN published a notice that emphasized the irreversibility of crypto transactions on ATMs and noted that there's a high non-compliance with anti-money laundering laws among the operators of crypto ATMs. At a high level, can you give any sense of what you're seeing as far as the trends in suspicious activity reporting specific to crypto ATMs that we should be monitoring?
Thank you, Representative Caston, for that question. I will say that crypto ATMs, like other financial institutions, are subject to the Bank Secrecy Act, and some are more compliant than others. We are seeing, however, as we noted in the alert, high use of certain crypto ATMs as a critical way of defrauding Americans. So it's something we're looking at very closely. I don't have an estimate in terms of the industry, but outreach to that industry and in ensuring that industry is as compliant as possible is one of our key objectives.
Okay, I'm particularly interested in, as you dig through, and maybe we can follow up offline, about the impact on seniors. I represent Chicago suburbs, which, given the way Chicago is laid out, means that I have about 40 mayors who I have to keep in touch with of lots of little small towns, and one of them has a very low tax base. It's one of these towns that depends fundamentally on the revenue from a couple convenience stores and liquor stores and not a lot of larger tax base in the community. And even in that tricky financial situation, the convenience store operator said they removed the Bitcoin ATM because the owner said it just broke his heart how many seniors he saw walking in there every day and putting money into the machine and then coming back later and saying this money's disappeared. We've had at least 20 states that have adopted or considering laws and regulation on crypto ATMs. Illinois did just enact a new law to require that operators at least impose daily transaction limits. Would you support similar federal requirements on ATMs to at least slow?
It's something I'm going to need to look into and take back. I can absolutely commit that's something that we'll look into and work with Treasury leadership on an approach.
Okay, and I know you had an exchange with Mr. Barr against Way One, if I'm pronounce that right. A part of what scares me on this, and I think we have done a terrible job this term in Congress, is we've allowed all of these transactions to operate overseas. The mixers are overseas, the transactions are overseas, and it's great if we've got the SAR, but then we don't have a way of getting in, right? And so I guess with the time that's left, is there specific statutory authority that you currently lack that would allow you to go after the bad guys? Like, I'm not talking about going after the good guys, but if you see that crime has happened, if you see that these pig butchering scams, where are you limited in your ability to prosecute?
One idea that was in the president's, the report to the president on the digital assets working group, and you saw it with our action on the Way One group, is we used an authority under Section 311 of the Patriot Act that was actually built for a different era, when the special measure that we used that was available to us was to cut off correspondent and payable bank accounting. which doesn't really factor in for in the virtual asset space, but rather some newer authorities targeted to Russian illicit finance or synthetic opioids trafficking, 2313A, 9714. They allow us to prohibit transactions, all transactions involving a group like Way 1. Now, we use the 311 authority on Way 1 to great effect, and we're able to, it's a very powerful authority. I'm very proud of that action. But involving fraud in other respects would be a way that we could modernize this authority. And regardless, my team very much looks forward to working with you on any new authorities.
I see I'm out of time. I believe Mr. Himes has been active on the Section 311 piece, and let's talk offline about how we might tweak that and improve it. Appreciate it, and yield back.
Thank you. I'd like to recognize the gentlewoman from Florida, Ms. Salazar, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and wonderful to be here with you, Mrs. Gacki. I'm Maria Salazar from Florida, 27 District, representing the city of Miami. And I'm sure that you're familiar that there's a lot of business between Miami and the regime in the island of Cuba. And we have discovered that 11 companies in my district who are blatantly, openly breaking the Cuban embargo, an embargo These companies are doing business with the Cuban regime, giving them oxygen so they can feed the repressive apparatus. And I just sent a letter to the Secretary of the Treasury and to the Mr. Rubio, Department of State, asking them to investigate and to shut them down. And I wanted to ask you to please help us and stop this madness. Because you cannot be taking money from Miami and from the Cuban exile community and be sending it to the Cuban regime to beat on the people that are trying to be free. So do you think I could have your word for you to be able to help me and your office to do something with this? I mean, I'm going to be forwarding to you the letter, but I really would like your commitment on the record.
Thank you, Representative Salazar. And I, for many years, FinCEN, so I'm very familiar with our restrictions on dealing with the Cuban regime. So I commit to you that FinCEN will certainly take a look at this information and see how we can support investigations, whether at OFAC or other parts of the U.S. government.
They are violating the embargo. You cannot do that because that's the United States law. Okay, now, another issue that is highly concerning to me as a United States citizen and as the representative of the city of Miami. Back in June, your office put on the blacklist 3 Mexican banks. One of the banks is called Cibanco. This is a very touchy subject because I'm concerned not so much about Cibanco, but about the American banking system. There has been no proof shown of money laundering from those people. I have met I'm not saying that there is, but they have been asking for proof, and your office has not shown why these people need to be on that list. The owner lost the bank, $400 million, just because we, the Americans, put him on the blacklist. You know, we have a lot of weight internationally. In our system, we are innocent until proven guilty. Aren't you concerned? I mean, I'm terrified that this could happen to any bank in my district or any bank in the United States. So please tell me, and don't tell me this is under investigation, we cannot talk about it.
Thank you, Representative Salazar. I stand by FinCEN's actions against the 3 financial institutions, Cibanco, Intercam, and Vector. We made very detailed public cases in orders issued under authority given to us by Congress.
I know you're doing your job. I know that you have to look for the bad guys, but my concern is that you could have made a mistake that could be repeated, and that is not the American way of doing business.
I understand.
Simple terms.
I understand.
How come there's no proof that you insisted on keeping that bank, and I have no interest in the bank, but it's just the principle.
We followed the law set forth in the Fentanyl Sanctions Act as amending the Fentanyl Sanctions Act, and found a basis on which to call these three financial institutions of primary money laundering concern. We worked
Why didn't you show the proof?
We publicly issued it in orders when we issued these orders, and be happy to share them with you.
I read them. They are not, it is not enough. And you know that. So what I'm saying is that how can we, in the banking system, make sure that we are not going to have a little bank be put on the blacklist and then the owner of that bank lose their assets and their own and the bank?
Now, I want to clarify that this authority is only targeted at, can only be used against foreign sources of money laundering, they're called primary money laundering concerned, whether they're jurisdictions, classes of transactions, or primary money laundering concern. But I respectfully disagree. I believe we have made the necessary legal cases.
I understand what you're saying, but I think the
these
message I need to send as the chairman of the Western Hemisphere Subcommittee within the House
Gentlelady's
Foreign
time is
Affairs Committee
expired.
is that we, the Americans, we carry a lot of weight, and we need to be more careful because our reputation
Gentlelady's
is
time
that.
is expired.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Madam.
The gentleman from Iowa, who's the vice chairman of the subcommittee, Mr. Nunn from Iowa, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Chairman Davidson, and I appreciate you holding this very important hearing today. Director Gacki, thank you so much for coming out to Iowa. And while we may be, you're under the Biden administration, you're now serving under the Trump administration, I want to say I appreciate you hearing from folks in our district and coming with me and holding a roundtable to actually be able to discuss some of the things that are working. Today, we're going to talk about some of the things that are challenges. When you came out, we talked about the Corporate Transparency Act. We talked about the policing of over 32 million small businesses and the heavy impact that placed on them, everything from $8,000 per small business to be able to reach compliance. And if they failed, we're talking about a $500 a day fine, in some cases up to 2 years imprisonment for failure. Now, you got some Iowa Nice feedback on that, and I appreciate you being there to hear from them. But it will be no surprise to you, I would like to talk about some of the red tape that's impacting us today. Right now, FinCEN receives close to 20 million CTRs and 5 million SARs. These are financial reporting requirements. Challengingly, it's believed that most of that information that was done by financial institutions, including very small institutions, was never used. To make matters worse, it found that these can take over 21 hours to complete each one of those. So let's put this in real-world terms. In Main Street, Iowa, that means we've got folks spending upwards of 533 million hours filing reports for FinCEN and the federal government. I'd like to ask, do we have any perspective on how many of those reports resulted in actual prosecutions?
Thank you. Thank you, Representative Nunn. And I want to thank you again for welcoming me and my team to Iowa. So one of the key objectives of this administration that we're focused on is reforming the Bank Secrecy Act regime, the MLCFT regime in the United States, to ensure that it is risk-based and focused on the highest threats impacting our law enforcement and national security, and that law enforcement is directing its resources to those highest priority threats.
Understood.
And part of that is taking a look at reporting. It's the reporting that we gained. We work very hard to try to ensure that we are engendering that feedback loop between law enforcement and financial institutions to show that the reporting is being used. And I think that it's not just prosecutions that are that happen, but that this reporting helps with this.
Director Gacki, I appreciate that. Now, here's the reality. We did this with CTA. We went after 40,000 bad actors, but we snared 32 million Americans in the process. My concern here is we're looking at 25, 26 million reports. How many arrests were made as a result of this reporting? Can you just give me a number?
Sir, I'm sorry, I don't have the number off the top of my head.
Okay, all right, that's fair. Let me ask this. Can you commit to publishing the effectiveness of those numbers?
Certainly, I can look, what we do in an annual report that we put out is we try to distill
I'm going to look for
feedback.
the last year's numbers, and I'm going to compare it to the 26 million and the 533 million hours of reporting. We need to do some analysis on this. The other part is our community banks are drowning in red tape while cartels are clearly laundering billions in fentanyl dollars. We need to focus on the real results, not on the compliance reports requirements coming out of banks. Let's agree to go after the bad actors. I want to quickly get to the Treasury hack that occurred earlier this year when the Chinese Communist Party went after Treasury systems. Who at Treasury was fired for allowing the Chinese into Treasury systems?
I'm sorry, sir, I don't have a response to that question.
Okay. The hack showed exactly why sensitive small business ownership data that doesn't belong on government systems was intentionally hacked. There's no indication that anyone was held accountable. If this happened to one of my small banks or my small credit unions, those guys would be out on the street and there would be a full inspection into what happened. I've not seen that happen at Treasury. So here's my ask right now. For those banks and lending institutions that have data on your systems that were hacked by the Chinese that I think are arbitrarily being kept on data servers, are you willing to help us commit to deleting those before another breach occurs?
Sir, I'm happy to make sure that the information that we collect and protect is held to the highest security standards. I'm aware of no breach of the Bank Secrecy Act data that we protect.
Well, let's look and see the after action of what happened with the Chinese, because I've seen no accountability to be able to actually hold whether that's true or not. I look forward to opportunities to work together on that. And then finally, Director Gacki, I think one of the things we have worked on together is the GUARD Act, making sure money laundering does not take place. I'd like to thank you for giving our team technical assistance on going after this, protecting seniors, and helping our local and state law enforcement. You know, is there anything you'd like to add on what we're doing to help protect through the GUARD Act?
I'd just like to thank you for your focus on the important issue in the GUARD Act, and just want to, if you need any further technical assistance, we're happy to supply it. Thank you.
Appreciate to work together. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I yield the remainder of my time. Thank you, Director.
Thank you, Mr. Nunn. I'd like to ask unanimous consent to submit for the record a report by the Independent Community Bankers of America for the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, recommendations for better coordinated and more effective policies enforcement. Without objection, we'll pause for a swap out on microphones. We have a failing microphone.
Test. Can you hear this? Works.
The gentlewoman from Michigan, Ms. Tlaib, is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Director, do you know, have you heard about in July how Senator Wyden announced that the Treasury Department has suspicious activity reports on Jeffrey Epstein's financial network detailing, I think, thousands of transactions totaling $1.5 billion?
Thank you, Representative Tlaib. I am familiar with Senator Wyden's communications.
Yep. Are you, among the largest transactions are two that Morgan Chase reported with Russian banks for as much as $100 million. Are you aware of that one?
I'm aware of Senator Wyden's communication, yes.
Can you tell the committee more in regards to, I mean, yesterday it was revealed that, just yesterday, that Chase employees knew of these suspicious transactions for more than a decade and they were ignored. Are you familiar with that?
Well, I thank you, Representative Tlaib, for these questions. And given the sensitivity of the data that we obtain through the Bank Secrecy Act, to include these SARs, I want to assure you that Treasury is taking this very seriously.
But we, as committee members, can we have access to that information? It should be public, correct?
This is highly sensitive.
Can you be subpoenaed for the records?
We are working with Representative Comer to ensure that we provide.
Okay. Well, I'm going to yield the rest of my time, Director, to my ranking member, Beatty. She'd like to put a motion, because I think Financial Services Committee should also have oversight in regards to any banking institution. As somebody that serves on oversight, sat at a round table with girls that were as young as 13 years old who asked us to follow the money. And I think it's our responsibility as members of Congress to do that. And with that, I yield the rest of my time to Ranking Member Beatty.
Thank you, Congresswoman Tlaib. Mr. Chairman, pursuant to Clause 2M of House Rule 11 and Clause 2K6 of the House Rule 11, I move that this committee issue a subpoena to the Secretary of Treasury to return to the majority and minority of the Subcommittee on National Security, Illicit Finance, and International Financial Institutions of the Committee on Financial Services and the Committee on Financial Services all complete and unredacted documents related to Jeffrey Epstein or individuals and entities associated with Jeffrey Epstein, including but not limited to wire transfers, bank accounts, and other transactions, other accounts, account holders that were party to any such transactions, currency transactions, actions reports, suspicious activity reports, and other Bank Secrecy Act data. Any documents related to a description or review of the network of Jeffrey Epstein's conducted by any party, including but not limited to any law enforcement investigation and/or investigations or review by any other party, and any document or review that addresses any connections to any Russian-based financial institutions, individuals, and entities, including but not limited to entities that are currently under United States or allied sanctions.
The gentlelady has moved to authorize a subpoena. For what purpose does the gentleman from Oklahoma seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman, I seek a point of order on the motion.
Point of order has been reserved. The committee will suspend and consider the pertinence of this motion. The subcommittee will now consider the motion offered by Representative Beatty to authorize his subpoena. Does the gentleman from Oklahoma insist on his point of order?
Mr. Chairman, I do not insist on my point of order.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Oklahoma seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman, I move to table the motion.
The gentleman has moved to table the motion. The motion is not debatable, and the question now occurs on the motion to table. Those in favor shall signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed shall signify by saying nay.
Nay.
In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it.
I request a roll call vote.
A recorded vote is requested. All those in favor of a recorded vote, raise your hand. A sufficient number having raised a hand, the recorded vote is ordered. We'll now take the vote on the motion to table. And we'll suspend until the clerk has set things in motion to do that. The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Lucas.
Yes.
Mr. Sessions. Aye. Mr. Barr. Mr. Williams. Mrs. Kim. Mr. Ogles. Mr. Nunn. Mrs. McLean. Ms. Salazar. Chairman Hill. Ranking Member Beatty. Mr. Gottheimer. Mr. Vargas. Mr. Mr. Foster,
No.
Mr. Gonzalez, Mr. Torres, Mr. Caston,
No.
Mr. Liccardo, Ranking Member Waters,
No.
Chairman Davidson. Yes. Ms. Salazar. Yes.
Would the clerk read how each member voted?
Chairman Davidson, aye. Mr. Lucas, aye. Pete Sessions, aye. Mr. Williams, aye. Mr. Ogles, aye. Mr. Nunn, aye. Ms. Salazar, aye. Chairman Hill, aye. Ranking Member Beatty, no. Mr. Gottheimer, no. Mr. Foster, no. Mr. Caston, no. Ranking Member Waters, no.
Has any member not voted or wish to change their vote?
Parliamentary inquiry.
The ranking member is recognized for parliamentary inquiry.
I want to make sure of what we're voting on or what has been attempted to be tabled. Is this a motion that this subcommittee issue a subpoena to the Secretary of the Treasury to return to the majority and minority of the Subcommittee on National Security, Illicit Finance, and International Financial Institutions of the Committee on Financial Services, all complete and unredacted documents related to Jeffrey Epstein or individuals associated with Jeffrey Epstein, including but not limited to wire transfers, bank accounts, and other transactions, other accounts and account holders that were parties to any such transaction.
The gentlelady yield for an answer. It is not a question on the subpoena. It is a question on tabling the subpoena, and the clerk will report.
The ayes are 8 and the nays are 5.
A majority having voted in favor, the motion to table is agreed to. I would like to thank Director Gacki for her testimony today. Without objection, all members will have 5 legislative days to submit additional written questions for the witness to the chairman. The questions will be forwarded to the witness for her response. Ms. Gacki, please respond no later than October 14th, 2025. This hearing is adjourned.